Hey guys, coming to you from the cab of my 71 International pickup. Today I'm going to share something that seems pretty common with this series of vehicles. This is going to apply to the pickups and the Scouts. My Scout is a 79, my pickup is a 71, and their gauges are essentially identical. But very commonly, when you find these trucks, the gauges don't work. In this case, at some point, they have added, I'm going to have to get a light, they've added this temperature gauge because the gauges stopped working. Apparently they weren't too concerned about oil pressure because all they added was a temp gauge. But this one I fixed. It wasn't reading anything on the temperature. I'm going to put a new oil sender in it and we'll verify that that works, but it should. Just, I know because this one works now, it lights up. So on this one, we're going to do this one next. Now, a word of caution is do not pull this gauge out when the battery's connected. You have leads coming for the amp gauge here, and they are hot all the time. If you pull this out, you'll contact the gauge somewhere, you'll spark, you could damage other parts of these. It's kind of interesting, these gauges are already painted white. On the Scout, they were blue, but I painted them white to make them more reflective for the light bulb inside. So I don't know when they stopped making them white and started painting them blue, but it kind of seemed like a step backwards. So let's see, this one's kind of hanging up on the dash a little bit there. Try this one-handed. So I don't know how well that's visible, but you can see these leads here, and also these here, these cables here for your, these are for the power, for the lights, also for the senders, for the gauges and such. Very careful pulling these out. The pins very fragile, so be cautious. Take your time pulling those out. Let me get this disconnected, and we'll go over it in more detail. All right, so slight change of plans. That other gauge, where the amp meter connects, was so badly rusted, it's probably going to break when I take it off. I'm not really concerned about that because I am going to rewire it, and I actually will do away with the actual use of the amp gauge. But I just don't want to break any of that until I'm actually pulling that wiring out, putting new wiring in. So what I did here was I just went back and I took the one out that I originally had out. But like I was saying, there's two things that can typically go wrong with these. This is the temperature and the oil pressure cluster. This is the one that'll typically, both my vehicles, it's the one on the far left. This particular gauge cluster has the voltage regulator. This takes a 12 volts. As soon as it gets power, it initially pulses with 12 volts or so, and then it's cut down to about like a pulsing 5 volts. And this is what your gauges, your senders and such use. Also for the lighting, it comes in through the harness, and this is what actually lights the gauge up. The lights ground through the body of the gauge, so when these gauges aren't working, typically you can have a bad voltage regulator. I've heard of that, but that's not the most common. Typically, what will happen, and this is exactly the case with this one, this gauge, the light didn't work, the senders didn't work. I pull the gauge out, and these little stamped nuts here were all finger tight. So what I did is I took the gauge out and just took them off. So you can take these 4 nuts off, take these screws out of your voltage regulator and it'll all come apart. Your gauge pieces will still kind of be left behind inside the body of the gauge. And then what you can do, you don't want to clean on this too hard. It doesn't take much, but I take just an alcohol pad. Just wipe down the copper pieces really good. Kind of go around these pins here. Again, be real careful with them. They're fragile. And then just put it back. Put this back on. It'll only go on one way, so you don't have to worry about getting it turned around or anything. Put this back on. Put your 4 nuts back on. And put them just a little bit tighter than hand tight. You know, once you get them hand tight, maybe just a cinch to make them tight, but not too much. They're just a stamp nut. They can't take much. Put your light back in. Now remember, your light isn't going to work until you get this put back in and your screws put in so it grounds out. But there you go. That is one way that you can probably, like I said, 9 times out of 10, if your gauges aren't working, check these nuts. Clean it up, tighten them down. You'll probably find that your gauge will work again. Also, if you want, I did this on the Scout, but you can, if you pry these tabs up, you can take the lens off, kind of clean up inside there. You can repaint your needles, get some of that little model paint, paint them again so they're bright red. You can also take a rubbing compound and polish this lens and make it a lot clearer. This one had some rust on it from where it was touching inside there, and I kind of rubbed on it for a bit, and it really made a huge difference. I mean, I don't know if you can tell from the one that's still in there, but it still has this rust piece on it. Now you can't, I don't think you can see that when it's in the truck and the dash bezel is kind of back on it, but so there you go. International, like I said, I know at least 71 to 79, probably 70 and 80 also would be the same thing, I'm assuming. Real easy way to get your gauges working again, most likely. Have any questions or ever got into these yourself and fixed them another way, post it down below. Tell me about it. Thanks for watching.